The content you're about to hear may be graphic in nature. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
If you stuck with us so far, it is Christmas Day. And we provide this content for people that maybe don't do like a lot of stuff on the holidays or around people that they want to slip their headphones or AirPods on and listen to something else. That's why we do this. Meg and I have both been in those situations at different points in time over the years where there are other things we would rather be doing. You had this idea years ago that we were going to do these holiday episodes. I think you started with the 12 Days of Christmas, and I might have gone a little overboard with how I handle all of this. I was like, why not just do an episode a day for 25 days?
Yeah, I never would have thought of that, but it works. People really enjoy it. We get a lot of listeners to our 25 Days of Christmas, and it doesn't even have to be Christmas time.
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, people will message me and ask me questions, and I realize it's earlier this year, I think it was April, somebody was messaging me asking about a case, and I was like, when did we cover that? And I went back and looked, and I answered their question, and then I went back and looked at it, and I was like, they're listening to a Christmas case. So people do listen, and that's why we put it out. Obviously, some of you are here today with us. I don't even know what I'm doing on Christmas Day this year. Do you have like plans for Christmas Day already by the time we're recording all this, or no?
Well, no, not this year. I will be having Christmas at my house with my family, but that's about the extent of what I know at this point. And I think that putting out episodes like this, it's our gift to our listeners, right?
Or ourselves. I don't know. Both.
I guess it's our gift. I don't know. Why? Okay, yeah, it could be to ourselves. But it also brings light to cases, right?
Yeah.
That otherwise maybe don't get the same light. We tend to have a theme going. And my point is, like, if you only listen to, if you don't have time during Christmas, like this could be a whole year's worth of content for some people, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it is, it's interesting because it's not really Christmas related this year. It is home for the holidays in some respects, but we've kind of veered off, and we really were looking just to cover interesting cases that had a few parameters, right?
Yeah.
But it's a smorgasbord of information that you won't get anywhere else. I can guarantee you that.
It is, yeah. I sit down and look at these, and the truth is I had some kind of question about something that happened. Most of these cases, people may not realize this, most of these cases, somehow, some way, they relate to this time of year. Somebody, like a lot of these crimes either occur this time of year, there's a conviction this time of year, there's an exoneration this time of year, they're sentenced this time of year. There's almost always a December, November date in there, but it's not necessarily like a Christmas story per se. I do that, like I go through and I just, like I have piles and piles and piles of information that I'm putting together. And I feel like sometimes I put you in a weird position with these because like you never really know how we're going to use them until we're sitting in front of the microphones and I turn it on.
This is definitely the most interesting time of recording. Yes.
So we're going to cover two cases briefly today. These episodes are not as long towards the end of this series for a variety of reasons. It gets difficult to record 20, 30 episodes at a time. And we're still actively recording
current episodes.
Yeah, the current episodes while we do this to sort of accommodate like our life and schedules. But I pulled up two for today. The first one's longer than the second one. And these are more Southern cases that I just kind of got down this rabbit hole. And I found them interesting because there's not as much information available about them. Today first popped up and got my attention from a 2005, I don't know, a booklet, or like it's a book. It's like an anthology book out of the Northwestern University Press. Wilkie Collins had put this out, and it's called The Dead Alive, the Novel, the Case, and Wrongful Conviction. This case pops up in there. So this case is about an American farmer in Alabama. His name is Bill Wilson. If you go Googling Bill Wilson, I don't know if he shows up anymore. I think he has like his own space, but there's a lot of people named William Wilson and Bill Wilson out there. For background, Bill Wilson is married to a woman named Jenny Wade in right around 1900. They're 20 years old. They have multiple children, and their third child is born in 1907. Sometime after this birth of the third child, not quite 2 years, but close to it, Jenny Wade, she leaves Bill and she goes back to her family. Bill, at that point in time, he chose to move in with his father. He takes their older two children, but Jenny leaves with the third child. They're in the process of getting a divorce when Jenny and the third child vanish. A woman named Jane McClendon had also disappeared. So for several weeks, there's a lot of information kind of passed around that these two disappearances of Jenny Wade and Jane McClendon are probably going to be foul play. So several years later, in late 1912, a man and his son are fishing on a property along the Black Warrior River. The property there is close to Bill Wilson's father's house. And this man and the son, they notice a bone sticking out of the ground. They find what's described as a mat underneath the soil, and they expose what they believe to be the skeletal remains of an adult and a child. The people that are fishing, their first thought is that maybe this is some sort of native or indigenous burial mound nearby. So they search the areas for what would be like relics or something that would be an artifact of the time these bones could have come from. And they don't find anything. So they put the bones back down, they cover them up, and they go back home. But they tell people about it. And people in the local area start looking, thinking that somewhere nearby there may be arrowheads or pottery or other Native American artifact. Over the course of the next several days, multiple people search. They don't find anything. They lose interest. But a man named Jim House, he speculates that the remains are not those of indigenous people, but possibly of Jenny and her child. He said that in 1908, he had seen Jenny visit Bill Wilson's father's house carrying a basket. And at the following morning, he noticed that there were footprints that led to the river. He followed the track and he found some children's clothing and he found a rock that had blood on it. This is his story. This story spreads, and this information gets back to the county solicitor. I don't know if they have these everywhere, but a solicitor is just the prosecutor in counties and towns. So the county solicitor, James Embry, he calls a grand jury, and they indict Bill Wilson for the murder of Jenny and Bill's third child. This case goes before a judge named J.E. Blackwood. In James Embry's opening remarks, he says that Jenny Wilson went to her father-in-law's house to visit her two older children in what he believes was either late November or early December 1908. Essentially, she's visiting for the holidays. He says that Jenny and Bill Wilson had quarreled, and Bill Wilson had murdered his wife and child. He then took the bodies to the bluff, and he burned them there to destroy the evidence of his crime. The fisherman testifies that he found the bones that have now been placed into evidence. These bones are speculated at the time to be the remains of Jenny and her 19-month-old child. A doctor named Marvin Denton, he's going to come and testify for the state about these bones. He agrees that the bones belong to an adult and a child, but he notes that this child, though smaller, has what he described as permanent teeth. Permanent teeth would not typically come in a human until the human is around the age of 6. He also testified that he had never seen any permanent teeth in a child under the age of 4. Jim House, he gets up and he tells his story about Jenny having been seen visiting the Wilson farm. He adds that he was concerned for her safety and that he had tried to talk her out of going. He says that when he met Bill Wilson the following day, Jim House asked him about his wife, and he said that Wilson denied that she had been there. It was after this encounter when Jim House found the footprints, and he follows them to the spot where the blood was found on a rock. And of course, we have a jailhouse snitch. I don't think this is the oldest jailhouse snitch in the United States, but it's one of the older cases I've read about using a jailhouse snitch, where there's like a record of it. A convict who had been in a cell near Bill after he'd been arrested, he testified that he overheard Bill Wilson tell his oldest daughter, Ruthie, "If you tell anything, I will tend to you when I get out." So they bring in Ruthie, who is 7 years old. They put Ruthie on the stand, and she is cross-examined about this statement. She states that the statement her father made was that if she was not a good girl, he would punish her when he got out of jail. There are multiple different witnesses brought on to describe conversations that have been overheard where Bill Wilson was showing animosity towards Jenny or had made comments indicating she wouldn't be back. So the defense gets on and they bring on Jane McClendon, mother. Her name is Lizzie McClendon. Jane McClendon had gone missing shortly before Jenny went missing. And Lizzie tells the jury that Jim House had visited her after her daughter had vanished and said he would testify he saw the Wilsons collectively kill her daughter if she would swear out a warrant for their arrest. Under cross-examination, Jim House had denied this claim, but he did admit that there was some type of issue between himself and Bill Wilson without elaborating. So 6 different witnesses, including Jenny's sister, they swear that at various times in 1909, they had seen Jenny and that she was living with a man named John Wilson, no relation to Bill Wilson. A woman named Mrs. Benton Cornelius, I love when they do that, when they just give her husband's name with an S on the in there. She testifies that in 1908, sometime around April, she had talked to Jenny and that Jenny had told her that since she was getting separated to Bill Wilson, she intended to move to Missouri. Bill Wilson's brother, John, not the other John, his sister Frances, his daughter Ruthie, and a man named John Rice, who had worked for Bill Wilson, they all denied that Jenny had been at the Wilsons' farm at any time after the separation. Testimony was given that the female skeletal remains had no dental work done, but Jenny Wilson had fillings in her 2 front teeth. Dr. J.F. Hancock testified that he believed that the bones of the younger skeleton were at least 10 years old, and that the adult skeletal remains belonged to an elderly person, that the child's permanent teeth excluded the skeleton from being that of a 19-month-old daughter. All right, so at this point, you've read some about all of this, right?
Yes.
Okay. So generally speaking, this trial is kind of run-of-the-mill, except for the fact that we have these disputed bones laying here that are alleged to be the wife and child's bone.
Right. And I would say that the permanent teeth and the lack of dental work was something that was strangely overlooked. And I can't figure out if maybe it was the timing, like they didn't realize the importance of dental. Now, I'm not saying like forensic odontology, but I'm saying that like the science behind permanent teeth having not formed in a 19-month-old's mouth and the fact that like fillings don't ever leave someone's mouth.
Yeah, this is something that like we kind of take for granted today.
It's really weird that it was just blatantly overlooked.
Yeah.
In order
I would agree.
For the conclusion to be reached.
Yeah. Well, the jury does their thing here. And on December 18th of 1915, so right before Christmas 1915, the jury finds Bill Wilson guilty. He is convicted of murder in the first degree, and he is sentenced to life in prison to be served at Alabama's Wetumpka State Penitentiary. That's the first prison ever established in Alabama, by the way. He files an appeal. I found a note that says the appeal was, quote, overturned. I take that to mean that his appeal was rejected or that the conviction was affirmed, because afterwards there are several petitions for clemency and a pardon filed on Bill Wilson's behalf that are also rejected.
Right. So that gets a little confusing, but that's how I interpret it as well. I know that it used to be that I've read some older like court type documents where objections are overturned, and that doesn't really make sense today, but it's basically just saying, overruled, right?
Right.
So in this case, it would be that, the appeal wasn't granted.
Right. In late 1916, so I just want to say, one of the things about this case that stood out to me is things move like lightning. Like the appeal happens, there's different pardons happening, there's a lot going on in this case, but it's all moving super fast.
I don't know that there were a lot of these types of case, because this would be essentially that, this man had killed both his wife and one of their children, right?
Yeah.
I think it was a big deal, and I think that these were not as commonplace.
I would think that was probably true. I pulled up the record for this in the National Registry of Exonerations to see if there's anything off from the story that we were going to be telling here. So, all right. There's a neighbor here, a guy named William Woodward. After Bill is convicted, and the Supreme Court of Alabama has affirmed this conviction, William Woodward gets kind of nosy. He believes that Jenny Wilson is alive, and he starts looking around to figure out if he can't either find her or prove that, there's evidence of her still being alive. And in August of 1916, so this is about 8 or 9 months after the conviction of Bill Wilson for the murder of Jenny, William Woodward, he sends the bones to Dr. Alex Hrdlicka. Now, Dr. Hrdlicka is a physical anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. He examines the bones and he says, these skeletons are probably from some very old burials. He sends back a letter to William Woodward, and he says, in his opinion, these bones come from between 4 and 5 different individuals. So Bill Wilson's attorney, he hears this, and he's also been looking along the same lines of what Bill Woodward is doing. And he has the idea to start running notifications in newspapers seeking information about them. Now, this is done a lot when somebody can't be served. I'm sure you've seen it before, where you're trying to serve someone and you end up not being able to find a good address, or they just duck the process server or duck the local sheriff. You can put a notice out. This would have been a very different experience back then, but ultimately the attorney putting these notices out pays off. In 1918, guess who pops up?
A not dead Jenny.
Yep, Jenny Wilson. She is alive and she is well, living in Indiana. She reads one of these newspaper notices. She had, in fact, left her parents' home in 1908, just like she said, didn't have very much money. She moved north to Illinois. She worked as a waitress, and she got remarried to a man named John Wilson, and she had settled in a small town in Indiana. So after she learns that her ex-husband and the father of her children has been convicted of murder, Jenny and her child travel back down to Blount County to prove that they're alive. On July 7th, 1918, they are greeted by a crowd of almost 1,000 interested onlookers. But Alabama decided to leave him in prison for the rest of his life. No, I'm kidding. She arrives, she signs an affidavit that she is who she says she is, and she gives a complete account of her movements from the time that she had disappeared until she was found. She is presented with her daughter, who is now 11 years old. And the same day, the governor grants a full pardon and releases Bill Wilson. If only things worked that fast, It
would be lovely.
In 1919, the Alabama legislature got a hold of this case, and they granted a special appropriation for Bill Wilson. That legislation, February 15th, 1919, actually becomes a statute that would, in this case, it determines the amount of compensation that Bill Wilson would receive, which would be around $3,500. Now, if that's today's money, it's about $70,000. And this is for, quote, services rendered to the state while in prison. This is entrusted to a Blount County probate court judge. The probate court judge who's supposed to hold on to this $3,500, guess what he does?
Spends it.
He flees the state. The judge runs away with his $3,500. So Bill Wilson ends up having to sue the judge's bondsman, and he finally gets the money, but it costs him $700 in legal fees to get the money back. It's believed it was around $2,500. So Bill Wilson uses the money. He buys a small farm, but he doesn't know what he's doing on the farm. He gets into debt and he loses the money. The last record we have of him, he was working as a day laborer digging coal in an Alabama mine. Thoughts on this one? I love these cases where somebody's alive and shows back up, like a Matlock moment in real life.
Yeah, and this isn't the only case that we've covered that has happened. And it's so interesting that, like, you want to not believe that it's possible that these, in this case, it was two people, right? It was the mom and the daughter. Right. You would like to think that it's not possible that, like, somebody got convicted of their murders when they're living alive and well. It seems like maybe she could have told somebody.
I think it was just a different time in terms of communication. And so I was married to someone that I know nothing about now. I don't see them. I don't talk to them. We're not on the same social media. Like, I never see them. And, like, something could totally happen in her life that I had nothing to do with, where somebody was like, hey, have you heard what happened to blah, blah, blah? And it could be something like they won the lottery or whatever. I would not know anything about it. So I could see how that could definitely happen in 1908 or whatever, 1909. I think that, I think it's a genius move to put out those newspaper notices. I wondered who reads those, and I guess now we know.
Well, and see, a lot of times, so this was a little bit different because that was like, hey, I'm trying to find somebody. But, like, when you do service by publication, like, basically you run it for whatever the statute requires. Like, if it's, 6 publications or whatever, if it's 6 runs of a publication that would be reasonably assumed to be seen by the person, that is considered service, right?
Yeah.
Like, they have said they've had the opportunity to see it. I don't know how relevant that is anymore. Usually people can be served without that. It's fascinating that it got to her and she was able to see it and came forward with it, because in a million years, I don't know that I would run it, because I would be like, this is pointless, right?
Okay, so one of the things I found interesting about this case was this is all happening and the bones come back and they are, like, definitely not going to be like a woman and child. The judge panics. I don't know if you read this or not, but he starts. So you know how, like, in some of the cases we've talked about, there's like a kind of a champion, and that person is there and they're, like, trying to, so, like, I've seen it be the lead detective before, where they're trying to get someone to listen to what they're saying about a case.
Yeah.
And no one is listening. Well, in this case, it was the judge. J.E. Blackwood is the one that's like, okay, something is wrong here. I don't know exactly what's wrong, but if these bones are 5 different people, I have made a mistake. And he starts trying to pressure the governor of Alabama and the attorney general to commute this sentence to let him out. The prosecutor in this case is like, you're crazy. So James Embry is blocking every single thing that comes up where, like, Bill Wilson might be innocent. He's saying no. I don't know who would feel weirder in that instance, but, like, both of them kind of end up with egg on their face. You know what I mean?
Everybody ends up with egg on their face here. I mean, all of them. They convicted somebody for murdering 2 people that were in no way dead.
Yeah.
It's actually, like, it's worse than, like, convicting somebody who didn't do it. Like, nothing even happened here.
Yeah. There's no crime at all in terms of the murder that everything is kind of a hubbub about. So I wanted to bring this one up. I had a second one. Do you have anything else on the Bill Wilson case?
No.
The Bill Wilson case, I found it interesting. I don't have a lot on it. But I had this other short case I wanted to cover that is really interesting to me and doesn't have a ton of information. I've read a couple of little articles over the years about this case. One of them comes out of the Charlotte News. It's off of newspapers.com at this point. It's literally, the headline is 4 Negroes in Chester sent to electric chair. That's the article. And it talks about these two guys. So Thomas Griffin and Meeks Griffin, they live in Chester County, South Carolina around the turn of the century. Thomas was born in January of 1889. I don't know what day. He gets dumped into this open category. His brother, I don't know his date of birth at all. They are prominent black farmers in Chester County. And when a man named John Q. Lewis is murdered in 1913, this is a 75-year-old Confederate veteran in Blackstock, South Carolina. When he is murdered, the Griffin brothers are convicted based on one guy's testimony. So this guy, John Monk Stevenson, he is found in possession of John Q. Lewis's pistol. He's threatened with a death penalty, but he's sentenced to life in prison if he will testify as to who has killed John Lewis. There are multiple people from the community who believe that John Lewis had been having a relationship with a 22-year-old named Anna Davis. How all this plays out, I don't know, but I hadn't heard this word used in a court document in a really long time. The word used here is that this was possibly a part of a miscegenation scandal. Do you know what miscegenation is?
Yeah, I do know what it is because I had to look it up because I did not know what it was. And it is it's where people of two different races are married.
Right. It's just interracial marriage or intimate relations. That's it. And like, I was like, why is this a thing? So I looked it up. There were laws. Now I knew it was like a thing in the US that you don't, whatever, mix races or whatever. I didn't understand it. But from 1935 till 1945, it was banned in Nazi Germany to intermingle with people of other races. From 1949 till almost 1990 in South Africa, it was banned. There were laws in the United States on the books until 2000 that said that race mixing was an enforceable offense. I was shocked to realize, like, one, that it had gone on this long. Two, that like it was an actual thing. I thought it was just like some kind of prohibition that had happened. Like people just decided it wasn't going to be a thing. So in the United States in 1967, the United States Supreme Court ruled in a case called Loving versus Virginia that anti-miscegenation laws were unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. So with this ruling, the laws were no longer to be in effect, but there were 16 states at the time, and they stayed on the books as blue book laws, like laws that were no longer enforceable, until 2000 when those states finally rectified it. So that's the rumor here. There were two other guys that were executed alongside Thomas Griffin and Meeks Griffin. Their names were Nelson Bryce and John Crosby. The community scuttlebutt or rumor or whatever, they believed that this murder was essentially about some kind of sexual relationship with 22-year-old Anna Davis having a relationship with 75-year-old John Lewis. So Davis and her husband, they're never tried for fear of a miscegenation scandal. The Griffin brothers, at the time, They were believed to be the wealthiest black people that lived in this area. They sell their 138-acre farm to pay for their defense against these accusations. Over 100 people petitioned the governor of South Carolina to commute the brothers' sentences, including the mayor of the town they lived in Blackstock, the sheriff, 2 trial jurors, the grand jury foreman. And you know what South Carolina did on September 29th, 1915? They executed them. In 2009, Tom Joyner, do you know who Tom Joyner is?
I don't know. Maybe.
He's a radio host for the Tom Joyner Morning Show.
It sounds familiar.
He's an incredibly popular personality. He's older now. He was born in Alabama, from the South. I think he started broadcasting in the 70s. I don't think he would have been on the air in the 60s. He went to college with Lionel Richie. He had joined a band as a musician. You know how you hear about those failed stories? You know what band he joined that like he didn't continue with? The Commodores. So Tom Joyner in 2009, he finds out he's related, or he seeks the pardons because he's related to them. They are his great uncles. So he takes a motion before the appeals court in Columbia, South Carolina. He had been on a show called African American Lives, which this guy from Harvard, Henry Louis Gates Jr., who, if you guys haven't seen this, they trace relatives on this show. And he traced 11 other relatives, but he traced Tom Joyner's lineage to Thomas Griffin and Meeks Griffin. And so it made him want to clear their name, and he did it. And I just thought that was like, first of all, what happens to these people being executed for what is probably, I want to say, like kind of pitchforks and torches. Like, I can't figure out why they like jump on them for the murder, but like 2 farmers who are among the wealthiest people in the neighborhood killing a veteran. I just have trouble wrapping my head around that. Like, it's not that I think, okay,
well, but
it could never happen.
Keep in mind, though, that Nelson Bryce and John Crosby were also executed for the same crime. So it's actually 4 guys.
Yeah, you got 4 guys going down. Again, yeah, it's that same shit. It's 4 people, 3 people, 4 people. It's the group of people. They can't figure out why that guy couldn't have done it. We know that.
I think that anytime it's 4, it's because there's brothers involved.
Well,
like that's why it goes from 3 to 4, because there's like a set of brothers. Now, in this case, John Monk Stevenson was in possession of the victim's pistol,
which he probably shot him with.
Well, that would be my guess. It seems odd. I don't know if John Stevenson was black or white. I'm going to say that if he were to be white, he was spared. And this is because this seems to happen like a lot of times. Like white people tend to blame a group of black people, and it rides all the way to the execution, right?
Yeah.
It's the craziest thing because, why would 4 black guys kill this 75-year-old Confederate veteran for no apparent reason?
No idea. It doesn't make any sense to me. I know these cases are always...
And it's almost like they throw in the Anna Davis innuendo just in case it doesn't work for some reason. It's so weird because John Stevenson goes to jail for life, according to what is put out there, right?
Yeah.
He is found in possession of the victim's pistol. I find it far more likely that the small-time thief, which is how he is described, is solely responsible for this murder. And it was probably for some stupid reason, like a small town thief would do. Right? He probably got caught in the act. Now, how tragic is that entire situation?
It's terrible.
It is. It's really, really terrible. And it was allowed to go on for some reason. I don't know why. I can't imagine why anybody wouldn't. Now, okay, granted, maybe it is hindsight.
Yeah.
For us, however, I can't imagine anybody looking at the situation and going, yeah, it was the 4 guys. And from what we can tell, like, nobody confessed.
No, there's no confession here. This is a quick trial. The records have been largely scrubbed from the internet at this point. So I went on to see like where to get more information. There's you could potentially go down a couple rabbit holes here. I have been unable to find it. I was stuck on that one article, which is what made me say, let's include this one. It's one of those cases that, like, if you didn't know any better, you just kind of pass it by and it's like a blurb. But it is horrendous. They killed 4 people for this one murder. We have no real record of it all. And what we were told, I saw one quote on the internet about this. Paul Finkelman, this is one of those death penalty info quotes. He said that Monk Stevenson would tell a fellow inmate later he implicated the Griffin brothers because he believed they were wealthy enough that they could pay for legal counsel and they would being acquitted. I don't know why anybody would record that sentence because it makes absolutely no sense to me that you would tell someone.
That is literally like trying to set the situation up.
That is like, I have no idea what anybody's thinking there. That is one of the worst things I've heard another human being say, and I've heard a lot of crazy, crazy things. You literally derailed these 25, I think one's 25 and one's maybe 27. I may have their ages slightly wrong because the records aren't great. But I read that sentence and I was shocked that that was the reason, because they were wealthy enough and he had to implicate somebody. I even read far enough in there to think, well, maybe it's him and maybe it's these 2 other guys that were all executed. But how do we get in there where we got these brothers in there? Thomas and Meeks had nothing to do with this.
Right. Neither did Nelson, Bryce, or John Crosby. None of them were involved.
Yeah, it's probably just Monk.
It is. And like I said, I don't know if he was white. That's my guess. That's my best guess as to why he would plead guilty to when he has the pistol, right?
Yeah.
The victim's pistol. Right there, most of the time when, there's always some sort of story like it was sold to them. And sometimes that does happen. But you got to look really hard at the person who shows up with the goods, right, of the victim.
Of course, yes.
And the fact of the matter is 9 times out of 10, just like the last person seen with the victim has got to be scrutinized. Anybody that has the victim stuff, it makes logical sense that
you're either going to find out they did it or you're going to find a real easy path back to who did.
Right. But see, when the path is only their uncorroborated testimony, which seems to be the case here.
Yeah.
It's not a valid path, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with you on that. I don't have a lot more on this. I hope that anybody listening has a great Christmas day. You got any more on these 2 cases?
No, that's it.
Happy holidays, y'all. Do you want to say happy holidays?
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Special consideration was given to True Crime Excess by LabrottieCreations.com. If you have a moment in your favorite app, please go on and give us a review or a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed in the crowd. This is True Crime XS.
Twinkles under starry skies, and Kris Kringle's drinking cherry wine. How I wish you were here, just
True Crime Excess is brought to you by John and Meg. It's written, produced, edited, and posted by John and Meg. You can always support True Crime Excess through patreon.com, or if you have a story you'd like them to cover, you can reach them at truecrimeaccess.com. Thank you for joining us.
This is just a reminder that we are part of the Zencastr Creator Network, and I've put a link in the show notes if you guys want to check it out for your own podcasting needs. I've always enjoyed using Zencastr. Their quality is great, and we were able to join their Creator Network at kind of a key time in their history. I have enjoyed it. I've considered a lot of other places to record and a lot of other ways to put together and host and distribute our podcast. But I've stuck with Zencastr the longest. We've been with them for hundreds of episodes now. And I'm putting a link in the show notes where you can check out what they have to offer and see if it's something you would want to use.